So you're probably not getting all of the points in standard English conventions. This is the part of the SAT test that most people are avoiding working on because it feels tedious. It feels like there's a ton of rules. It feels like this material has very little to do with your life. And so you're probably not getting the points that you could get in this section. And we're going to fix that today. We're going to look at a number of questions and standard English conventions. And you're going to see that there's not really that many things that you're asked to do in this section. It's a full 25% of your reading and writing score. And it's something that anybody can master. So if you're looking at your score report and you don't see full bars, and actually even if you do see full bars, but you've missed the occasional grammar question, you're probably leaving at least 30 points on the table just with this stuff. If you're missing bars, you're probably losing 50 or 60 points or more just in this one section, and it's so beatable. So today we're going to fix that. We're going to look at a number of questions in standard English conventions, and I'm going to teach you how to see the test the way I see the test. It's going to make it much easier on you. You don't have to become the master grammarian that your parents dream that you'll be someday. You can just learn a few things, and you're going to be ready to go. A few little tricks, and we're going to rip. So let's go. The first thing we're going to look at is this thing called form, structure, and sense. And so that's one of the two subcategories of standard English conventions. And there's basically two types of questions here. There's verb questions, and then there's this other thing called modifiers. So the first question you're seeing here is a modifier. And the first skill I want to teach you is how to know what type of question you're working on. Because you need to know, what am I looking at so that you can apply the right strategy in the moment, okay? So the question that we're seeing here, I'll read it to you. Known as Earth's living skin, biocrusts are thin layers of soil held together by surface-dwelling microorganisms such as fungi, lichens, and cyanobacteria. Interesting, right? Probably not. So here's the thing. What I just read is your experience on the test. You're going to read a sentence, and that sentence has literally nothing to do with what you're asked to do here. I mean, in the smallest way, that context could be of use to you on certain specific questions, but I'm telling you that on the vast majority of these questions, you don't have to even read that sentence, okay? So now let me show you what you should do. You should start by noticing that there is a phrase here. It says which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. So that tells you what we're working on. Literally grammar rules. That's what we're working on, right? And the answer choices, the shape of the answers, so to speak, tell you something else, okay? So notice that all of these answer choices just take phrases and they mix them around, right? So this isn't a question about a comma or a semicolon or a verb because there's a lot going on here, okay? So this is the type of question where if you don't know the game you're playing, you'd be totally confused what you should be assessing in these answer choices. You should be looking for one thing, which is what is the subject of each answer choice, okay? So the first one says a study's recent estimate. The second one says an estimated 60%. The third thing says these crusts. And the last answer says a recent study. Okay, so here's the only question you actually care about here. Who or what, okay? Who or what, if we read the next sentence, the one in which the question is located, it says, fortifying soil in arid ecosystems against erosion. Who or what is fortifying the soil? Does a study's estimate actually fortify the soil? No, fortify means strengthen. A study's estimate doesn't actually strengthen the soil. Does an estimated 60% reduction in global dust emissions each year, does that fortify the soil against erosion? Probably not, right? An estimated reduction in emissions, is that fortifying the soil against erosion? Well, maybe a little of the context would help you there, but at the very least you can say that doesn't sound like the kind of thing that fortifies soil. How about these crusts, okay? Well, what are these crusts? The previous sentence lets us know, so maybe a little context would be at least helpful at this point. And these biocrusts, as mentioned in the previous sentence, they hold together stuff in the soil, okay? So that definitely sounds like the kind of thing that is fortifying the soil against erosion. So C is probably the right answer. The last one says a recent study. We've already said a recent study is probably not what's actually fortifying the soil. Okay, so if you approach this question in the right way, then you're able to answer this question in a reasonable amount of time and to do so with great clarity. So we're working on grammar, the first thing, right? Conventions of standard English. The second thing is, what do the answer choices tell us? They tell us the type of question. And then we can ask ourselves something really simple: who or what? Okay? So modifier questions, you're going to get about 3 or 4 of these on your test. And if you're ready to attack these in the right way, you get them done in 30 seconds. If you don't know how to attack them the right way, then you get them done in probably 3 minutes and maybe get them wrong. Okay? So when we see modifier questions, we ask the same questions over and over again to make this work sort of codified, simple, clear. I'll show you a couple other ones before we move on to the verbs. So here's another one right here. And I'm going to do with this question what I would like you to do on the test as opposed to the way you would normally encounter the question. So once again, the question itself tells us conventions of standard English. The answer choices have different subjects. It says Morocco, or Traby's debut novel, or Traby, forgive me with that name, but Traby themselves, or published. And actually way down here is actually the subject, Traby again. Notice how two of these answers have the exact same subject. Answer choice C, Traby. Answer choice D, after a comma, Traby. Okay? They cannot be right because they are the same. If two answer choices are the same in the key aspect that the question is actually testing you on, then you know it's not the right answer. Okay? So C and D are definitely wrong, and now we're down to A and B. The question is who or what. If we look at the stuff prior to the blank, the question is who or what is a coming-of-age story? So that sounds really simple now, right? Is it Morocco is a coming-of-age story? Probably not. Is the debut novel of this guy Traby, is that a coming-of-age story? In all likelihood, yes. So I want you to notice that in this question, there's a lot of stuff I didn't have to read because I was looking for the right thing. I knew what I was working on, and I could go right to the key element of the text, right? So if you don't know that, you have to read some paragraph about, the canon of North African literature, which may be really interesting, but it's not really of importance to us as we're answering this question. Let me show you one more just to kind of show you how you can get the rhythm of this kind of work. Okay? This one's pretty hard, but we're going to give it a go. So once again, you won't see these all in a row in the test, so you always have to say, what kind of question am I working on? So once again, it says conventions of standard English. That means it can only be about punctuation, verbs, or this thing we're doing, which is called modifiers. Okay? So it's one of those. The answer choices, because they're long and they're mixing up the words, this is not a punctuation question, which basically only changes punctuation. This is not a verb question, which basically only gives you changes to the verb. We see this whole long answer choice in each case. So we're working on a modifier question. We know that. Okay, so now here's the question. Compared to that of alumina glass, our question is who or what is compared to that of alumina glass, which is kind of a weird question to be asked, that of alumina glass. So here's what happens to most people. They say, well, what can we compare to alumina glass? Who or what are we comparing to alumina glass? And they think it's silica glass. That seems reasonable. However, as we saw in the last question, answer choice A and B, which have the same subject, silica glass, if two answer choices are the same in the key respect to which the question is asking, then we know that those answer choices are wrong, okay? So if you're disciplined as a test taker, this really hard question becomes pretty reasonable because you can say, okay, well, I know one thing for sure. It's not A and B because those are exactly the same thing, okay? So silica glass, wrong. Answer choice A and B, both out. Now we have one question to ask ourselves. Who or what is compared to that of alumina glass? Is it a significant disadvantage or silica glass's atomic arrangement? Now this is really, really subtle, but I bet you could figure it out. Compared to that of alumina glass, silica glass's atomic arrangement is more dispersed. Certainly that makes sense. We're comparing something about alumina glass, and that would be the glass's atomic arrangement. right? So answer choice D is definitely the best answer. C is wrong in a very subtle way. So let me point that out to you. Although I imagine that you could make the choice between C and D. In my experience, most students can choose between C and D. But just so that you can see what's actually wrong with C, it's actually something very, very small. It's the letter A, the word A, the indefinite article A. So articles can be definite like the, or indefinite like a. Okay? So because it says that of alumina glass, it has to be something definite, not something indefinite. So you probably know that intuitively more than you know it technically, and that's okay. You don't have to know everything technically on this test. You just have to know what game you're playing, and you have to be ready to play that game. So knowing that two answer choices that are the same are therefore wrong allowed us to get rid of the tempting answers on A and B and make a choice that's more intuitive to us between C and D. All right, so that's modifiers. That's how modifiers work. They work like that every single time. So I'm not going to bore you with a bunch more of these questions. I just want you to know that if you see a type of question where it says conventions of standard English, and then it gives you a big, long answer choice with a bunch of the words changing orders, you're definitely working on modifiers. And the main question is just who or what. If you ask yourself who or what, you're going to get the answer. Okay. So let's now turn our attention to the other thing that's in the so-called form, structure, and sense category. So this is the other half of form, structure, and sense. And that is just verbs, okay? There are 3 types of verb questions. And I'm actually going to start with type 1 because I'm so creative. I've been teaching folks this for about 18 months, this question about verb type 1. I've been teaching SAT for 20 years, but I've been teaching verb type 1, or this way of thinking about verb questions, for 18 months. I've been very hesitant to put this on the internet because I think a lot of people who study for this test might take this information and misapply it. But I'm going to teach it to you now because I'm going to trust you to do your best with it. And if you don't do your best with it, if somebody else does something with this information that is detrimental to their score, that's on them. But I trust that you're going to do the right thing with this information. So verb questions can actually be answered in a very, very specific way that is extremely easy if you know what you're doing, okay? So to be clear, the document that we're looking at is only hard questions. We're only looking at the questions that are considered difficult. This is the stuff that makes the difference between getting a 600 and a 750, that kind of thing, okay? So let's find a good verb question. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I know if something is a type 1. Okay, so if you look at the answer choices to this question, once again, we start with the question itself. It says conventions of standard English. So we know we're working on, punctuation, verbs, or modifiers. As soon as we see the answer choices, it's quite obvious we're talking about verbs. Okay, so before we do any reading, you could just ask yourself, are these singular or plural? And you don't have to ask yourself that in an abstract way. You literally have to see what types of pronouns would go before these verbs. So would you say they are or he are? Of course, you would say they are. So that means answer choice A is plural. B, would you say they were or he were? Of course, you would say they. So B is plural. Okay, we have 2 plural answer choices. The third one, would you say they have been or he have been? Of course, they have been. We have 3 plural answer choices. And the last one, would you say they was or he was? Of course, you would say he was. Okay, so answer choice D stands out from the pack. There are 3 answer choices that are plural and 1 that is singular. Whenever you have that situation, you pick the outlier. You pick the one that is different from the pack. If you do this, you will get all these questions right. I promise you. I have not seen a single type 1 verb question. That's what I call these, type 1, where we're dealing with singular or plural. I have not seen a single type 1 question go the other way, where it's one of the 3 that are all plural in this case. Be right. That's never been the case. It's always the one that stands out because they're testing you on one thing, right? So if they're testing you on singular, plural verbs, subject-verb agreement, then what they're testing you on is should you pick the singular or the plural one. If you know that and you apply it, you're getting these questions right every time. I didn't even read this passage and I'm getting this question right, okay? So let me show you more of these type 1s. And then we'll talk about type 2 and type 3 as well, by the way. But you always test for type 1 first because it's the most common of the so-called difficult questions, okay? So here's another type 1. I can tell because I've just looked at the answer choices and I've seen this game, okay? So we see conventions of standard English. We know what we're doing. We see verb answer choices. We're on a verb question, okay? So would you say they hasn't been? Of course not. You'd say he hasn't been. Would you say they wasn't? No, you'd say he wasn't or she wasn't. Would you say she isn't or they isn't? Of course, you would say she isn't. So we have 3 singular in this case, right? And then the last one, they aren't. You wouldn't say she aren't, right? So one of these answer choices is plural. The rest are singular. That means it's answer choice D. That's it. It's really that simple. Now let me show you why it's considered a hard question. The actual subject is way back at the beginning of the passage, the artistic talents. It's not always located right there, so you can't say it's always the first couple words. It could be somewhere else in the passage. But the distance between that subject and the blank that we're actually filling way down here is such that there are many things in between that would, get people thinking it should be singular. First of all, Barbara, or her historic novel, or Sally Hemings, the conversation it inspired up here. All of these things stand in between the actual subject, which is the artistic talents, and the verb, which is aren't. So if you do all of that, it's much, much harder. But if you just simply say, I'm going to go check if we have a type 1, then you're good to go. Okay, let's see if we can find a type 2. And indeed, we do have one here. So a type 2 verb question is when you're actually asked whether you should use a infinitive verb or a conjugated verb, okay? So the question becomes, if you see these answer choices, we see to forge versus forging versus forged, and then we have one that says and forging. Okay. So these questions, verb type 2 questions are, in some cases a little bit harder than verb type 1s. You're probably going to see 1, maybe 2 of these on your test, okay? So this type of question, the first thing you would check for is to see if you have, one answer choice that is a conjugated verb and the other 3 that are not, or vice versa. In this case, the and forging is creating a third type of answer choice, which is one that includes a conjunction. Once you know that that's the case, you have a little bit more work to do. So let's read this question. I'll read the important part. It says, working from an earlier discovery of Carpentier's, chemists Emmanuel Carpentier and Jennifer Doudna recreated and then reprogrammed the so-called genetic scissors of a species of DNA-cleaving bacteria, blank a tool. So we're going to say either to forge a tool, forging a tool, forged a tool, or and forging a tool. Okay? This is a really hard question, as I said, but if we look back, we have 2 verbs, recreated and reprogrammed. So if you recreated and reprogrammed something, that is the main verb, right? The main verb, we have essentially 2 main verbs here. These 2 people, they did 2 things. They recreated and reprogrammed. The question would be, should I put A or B, to forge or forging? 99 out of 100 of my students basically are choosing between those 2 answer choices. And there's actually a really easy way to determine which of those 2 should be right. If you have a comma right before the blank, we do not, right? After bacteria, we don't have a comma. If you did have a comma, you should put an ing. If you don't, you should put the infinitive to forge, okay? So in a type 2 verb question, if you actually have 2 reasonable answer choices, you should simply say, do I have a comma? Then I'll put an ing. Do I not have a comma? Well, then I'll put the infinitive. If you know that, then this turns into a game. You just ask yourself these way simpler questions, right? You don't have to worry about massive amounts of understanding of the subtleties of language or something like that. It's just straight up, is there a comma? ING. Is there no comma? Then put the infinitive. Okay, so that's verb type 2. I'll show you other verb type 2s. Sometimes they do something very similar to type 1s. So let's see if we can find one here. This is another type 1. I'll show you really quickly. One thing focuses, many things focus. One thing or many things are focused, many things were focused. So really quickly, I saw that 3 answer choices are plural. 1 answer is singular, and that's the right answer. And by the way, this one's really hard because we have each one of these plays as the subject. Each one is singular, but plays are plural, and we mentioned a couple plays, Henry V, Richard III. So because of that, people are going to pick the answer choices that are plural, but you're going to know better. You're going to know that 3 of these answer choices, if they're the same, then just cross them all off, okay? So let me find you a type 2 here. Raining to rain. Yeah, here we go. Okay, it took me about 10 seconds to notice what type of question this was, and that's what I want for you as a student. When you see a verb question, you want to say, what type am I on? Type 1 will have singular and plural answer choices that are conjugated, meaning they could be the main verb in a sentence. And you know what this sounds like because you just stick a subject in front of it, right? So I'll show you what I mean. I couldn't say, she to rain back on Mars's surface. That sounds weird. But going down the answer choices, I also couldn't say she raining back on Mars's surface or she having rained back on Mars's surface. But I could say, they or, many things rain back on Mars's surface. So only one of these is a main verb, a conjugated verb, okay? And that answer is going to be the right one. You have 3 and 1 again, okay? So we're taking advantage of answer choices. Patterns in the answer choices are maybe more valuable than deep knowledge about the material, okay? So on verb questions, if you have 3 answer choices that are singular and 1 that are plural, you pick the one that's plural. In this case, this is a verb type 2. If you have 3 answer choices that are not conjugated, and by that I mean to say they couldn't be the main verb. Technically, they are conjugated, but some of them are, but they couldn't be the main verb. So to or ing, those type of answer choices, they're not going to be main verbs. If you have 1 of those and 3 that are main verbs, pick the outlier. In this case, we have 3 that have an ing or an infinitive to in front. It's going to be D, rain, back onto Mars's surface. Okay, so I won't bore you with all the details about, planetary science and impact spherules because those things don't matter. I will say, however, that you should take seriously what happens to your mind when you're busy thinking about planetary science, asteroids, impact spherules. When you're thinking about all of those things, you're not thinking about grammar. And it's very, very natural to look at a passage like this and feel like you need to understand to some extent what's being said in order to make a decision about grammar. That's not the game you're being asked to play. The game that the test makers, your opponents, are playing is they're distracting you with impact spherules and, 25% of the sand on Mars. None of that matters. All that matters is you have a verb question and you know what game you're playing, okay? So now I'm going to show you, let's see if I can find a third, one more type 2 question. Is this one? Yeah, this is one. And again, you can tell really quickly if you know what you're doing. So I just scanned this document, the hard verb questions, and I found one by glancing at the answer choices. Imagine how much faster you go through the test if you're able to do this, right? So conventions of standard English, answer choices that are short and they're just verbs. Here's what I did to just see if this was the type of question we're looking for. I could say, he looked. I could say, he looks. I could say, he is looking. But you know what I couldn't say? He looking. That's not a sentence, right? So 3 of these would create a full sentence with just the addition of a subject. 1 of them would not. So that's the right answer. In this case, I'll describe to you why it's the right answer, because it relates to something we said earlier. If you'll recall with type 2s, I said if there's a comma right before the answer choice, there's a high likelihood that you're putting an ing on type 2s, right? So here we have it. And why does the ing work? Well, because these two commas, we're not talking about grammar or about punctuation on a lot of these questions, but just, bear with me. The two commas in the area that I've highlighted here create like a set of parentheses, right? You could call it a parenthetical phrase. You could say that it's a non-essential clause. I don't care what you call it. We don't need those technical details completely dialed for you to ace this test. What you need to see is basically those two commas are working to separate information from the sentence. And frankly, you don't even need to see that, right? If you're the kind of person that's curious about this kind of thing, basically the sentence, the main essential part of the sentence is on the outside of our highlighted piece. Author Madeleine L'Engle begins her novel. Great. However, in the time that it's taken me to explain that, you as a test taker can move on to the next question because you know that you're on a certain type of question and you found the outlier. Okay? So now let's talk about the rarest of the hard questions, which is what I call type 3. Basically, a type 3 is one where you actually care about verb tense, okay? Everybody thinks you're talking about verb tense the whole time. They think you're talking about, every single question, past, present, or future. But we're actually not doing that. We're talking usually about singular, plural. That was our type 1. Or we're talking about, main verb versus not main verb. That was the type 2. But the type 3, which, by the way, your easy questions will be about verb tense. But when they're hard questions, they are the rarest type of hard question in grammar is the verb type 3. This is where you actually care about past, present, future. So we probably will have to read that. But the only way you know you're dealing with a type 3 is if you've canceled out type 1s and type 2s. So if I look at this set of answers, I could say they were, they have been, they are. I could say one person was, right? So actually, this is actually a type 1. So I'll find the one that's a type 3 in a second, but I know I've just corrected myself with the fact that this is a type 1. It's type 1 because there's only one that's singular. And amplifying is the subject. Amplifying was of particular importance. Okay, let me see if I can actually find the rarefied type 3 for you. We have very few type 3s, but I do think I have one on this document. If not, then fair enough. Here we go. Yes. How do I know this is a type 3? Well, I could say one already served, one was already serving, one already serves, and one had already served, right? So I just saw that all of them work for the same subject, so it's not singular plural. The real giveaway, okay? The real giveaway is the word had, okay? Because had, I could say one person had already served. I could say many people had already served, right? So because that word works both ways, you actually know you're not working on a type 1. And they're all conjugated. You just saw me run through with putting the word, one person in front of, one person had already served. All of them are conjugated. So you're not on type 1 and you're not on type 2. So you can rest assured that finally you do care about singular versus plural, okay? I'm sorry, you do care about the past, present, or future. Okay, so how do I know which version of this to use? Well, there's a phrase in this, I'll read it, and I'll tell you when we get to the key phrase. A second-generation Japanese-American, Wataru Misaka, blank in World War II, and already won two amateur national basketball championships at the University of Utah when he joined. Okay, this phrase. He had already done something. Every answer choice says already. When he joined. Okay? When he joined is in the past. Right? Anything with an ed at the end is the past. He joined. So, we're talking about something that happened even further in the past. Had, you can remember the D for distant. Had is for the distant past. Okay? So, we had to scan through this whole document to find one type 3. And even when you find a type 3, there's a really easy game you can play, as you can see here. So that's a quick rundown of verbs. As you can see, everything in form, structure, and sense, we just ripped through in, a half hour? In a half hour, you've come to understand all of the things that come up in form, structure, and sense. In another half hour, I can explain to you everything you need to know about punctuation. Of course, to apply these things requires, discipline, focus, consistent practice. If you want that stuff, if you're ready to work hard and do that stuff, then you should join the 1600 game. It's free for a week, and it lets you see all these games that we're playing in great detail, great questions that have been carefully crafted by myself, crafted by me. I should say it correctly if I'm going to teach you about grammar. They've been crafted by me because I think that there's really not that much great material on the internet for students looking for really hard questions that match the test. A lot of people are using AI to churn out questions, but they don't care about you. They don't care about your score. I do. So come to the 1600 game, and I'll show you what's up with all of these types of questions. You'll be ready to go on test day. Take care.
That's good.
Cool.